It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and with us for Theology of the Body Thursday is the Executive Director here at Redeemer Radio, Cindy Black. Thanks for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, Theology of the Body and family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, part of family is it's a reflection of the Trinity and the community of God, that God is not a single person, but three persons.
And an exchange of love, yes. And the family is a sign of the Trinity. So our families give us a glimpse of the life within God. And I think that sometimes can put a pressure on us because we think, I know when I heard families become what you are, a sign of the Trinity, and then I see what our house looks like on a daily basis, or like when you're raising kids and there's messes and meltdowns and arguments. And I think, whoa, we are so failing to be what we were created to be. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, just like we say at the Easter Vigil, "Oh, happy fault of Adam that merited so great a Savior," the worst things, like the messes of our life, actually give God an opportunity to do greater things. So creation started with God ordering chaos.
Right.
And then our redemption was this awful, like physical, spiritual, mental torture of our Lord, but it merited he merited Easter Sunday for all of us. Mm-hmm. So it's not a family living out in harmony that necessarily reflects, like, that's not the only way to reflect God. Uh-huh. It's through the continual trying and focusing and asking Him to bring greater goods out of the times that we fail to be self-gift and to love the way that we were created to love. And, I don't remember if it was last week when the announcement of Audrey Assad going through a divorce came out. And my heart just broke for them. Mm-hmm. Don't even know them. Like, I've seen her in concert, but I've never actually had a face-to-face conversation with her. But my heart broke for them. Because marriage is so hard. I can't imagine what they went through to get to that point. Mm-hmm. Then I also saw, well-meaning Catholics posting on there, judging them so harshly, like, you can't do this, you made a promise. And honestly, I sit there and think, oh my word, it's only by the grace of God that I'm not in that situation. Marriage is so hard, and I don't know why I've been given the grace, needed to make it through. But I think we need to spend a little more time talking about the messiness of life so that we don't feel so isolated when we experience some of these things. That, you know what? I may sound like I have it all together. I come in here Thursday mornings with notes on theology of the body, but in reality, at home, I get frustrated. Actually, just 2 days ago, was miffed at my son for not picking up a pile of stuff that I had asked him several times to, and I scooped it up and threw it on him. He was sitting in a chair, and I just threw it on him. Yeah. And that's just something so trivial, but if you think about it, like, I regularly neglect my husband's need for affection or just paying attention to him because I'm worried about other things. We all bring patterns of communication into our relationships, and, those can be challenging for the other spouse who has different patterns of communication. And I don't know how you are with like promptness, but oftentimes I hear that being a struggle between couples and their children. Some have a very high expectation of not being late, and then others are a little bit more lackadaisical about that. Yeah. And it can create this conflict, like all the time, like day after day after day, or hour after hour, depending on what we have going on.
Yeah, I want to be early and nobody else seems to care.
Right. That's how yeah.
So one of the things this is reminding me of is I've heard, I don't know if it was a study or just a, kind of an observation, but that people who grow up with not seeing their parents argue because they would do that, privately or whatever, have a harder time with marriage than those that see their parents argue, but then see that they're able to still work it out.
Right.
Because of this expectation of, well, now we're married and we're arguing. My parents never argued, and then you think that there's something wrong with your relationship. In the same way, yeah, if everybody around you seems like their marriage is perfect and you're struggling, then it seems like, oh, we probably weren't supposed to have gotten married, or like there's something wrong with our relationship. Right, yeah. And not to say that,
or
that
worse yet, I always think there's something wrong with my spouse. I don't like my first reaction is not like, okay, what is my shortcoming here? It's if he would just do this or say it, like handle this the way that I want him to.
Or comparing to somebody else's husband or wife, like if he would be more like this guy, we don't see everything. And so then we assume when we hit some kind of roadblock that we're some kind of exception to the norm, rather than saying, there's going to be difficulty and struggles, and how are we going to work through that?
And drawing on your point about if we never see it, actually, if it never happens, if Good Friday never happened, we wouldn't have Easter Sunday.
Right.
So not only does God work in our messiness, but if we turn to him and ask him, he can bring a greater good out of the times we fall than if we hadn't fallen. That's the mystery. That's a Paschal mystery, actually, that we should be striving to love as we were created to love. But I know some of the best lessons in our family have been when somebody has fallen short, terribly short, said mean, hateful things, but yet then come and say, you know what? I should have never said those things. You mean a lot to me. I love you. And, asking for forgiveness. That's a huge thing when we have those great big falls. And even little things, just being able to say, oh, I'm sorry. I know one of the greatest tools in our marriage has been like the do-over. Like if I have a nasty tone and about something that just happened, like in traffic or something, and I walk in and my tone is terrible with my husband, he's like, what's going on? And then I try to look for something in him to justify why I just talk to him that way. But if I actually stop and say, you know what, you're right. Can we start that over? Because if I don't acknowledge that, then I'm looking for something in him, and then he comes back to defend himself, and it becomes this to be able to stop and say, you know what, I don't want to do this pattern anymore, and to change the direction, asking for the grace, and it really is a matter of we just keep trying, and but finding God in the messiness is really important, that we don't just image God when we're living perfectly this self-gift. I mean, he lives it perfectly. I mean, God exists as the perfect self-giving love, but it's not like God isn't dwelling in our relationships when it doesn't look that way. I think he understands that we need him. And it's that humility that, oh my goodness, I am a broken person with unrealistic expectations and needs that no one in my family can fill. Only the Lord can fill. So that's where we can really take a moment and experience God for that, or even in retrospect say, you know what, that really was awful going through that, like a big family fight or something like that. But then treasuring, like, this is still my family. I still love them, and I'm going to just keep choosing to love.
And I think besides just a marriage and with kids, just siblings, maybe cousins, other family, like friends that are close enough that you might consider family, that, it's not always going to be smooth and getting along, but to realize And I think this kind of goes back a little bit to what we were talking about last week with dating, is this false notion that love is easy. It's something that you fall into, and it happens to you, and there's nothing that you can do to stop it. Instead of being something that you have to fight for and work for and sacrifice. And the greatest example of love was Jesus sacrificing himself on the cross. It was painful. It was not like, oh, this is delightful and this is beautiful and roses. But when these relationships do find difficulty, that's when we have to really kind of double down and make the sacrifices to make it work. And getting back to, a divorce situation, not to say that every marriage can be saved if you just work hard enough. I'm not suggesting that, but that we would try as much as we can, and that we wouldn't give up easily with any relationship.
And being careful not to judge, because we do not know somebody else's situation. We have to give people the benefit of the doubt, that especially somebody who's trying to live faithfully the life of the church, that they this is painful enough for them already, that us heaping judgment is not going to be helpful. The devil's doing plenty of that in their minds, I'm sure. So just being there, we need to love people anyway. Yeah. People love us anyway. So we just need to love people and journey with one another. And, there's the big issues, but then, making sure just even in the small day-to-day things that we acknowledge that that's what it's like. And not to say that we go around and air everything that goes on in our house. We have to be very careful. And I fail at this even, but I try to look inward when I'm reflecting or talking about a struggle. And instead of saying, well, if my husband would have done this, or that my son would have done this, or my sister, would think about somebody else or something. I can't control what they do. I can only control what I do. And if I react differently, then our interaction's going to be different. And I can only choose what I do differently. And, I really have never regretted extending grace, or being the first to admit wrong, or even taking on fault that maybe wasn't even, I really don't believe that, but I'm going to try to own as much of it as possible. I've never regretted that or thought it led to something bad. Then I have a peace within me that even if I was the innocent one in it, there was a time when I wasn't, and I wasn't called out on it. So being able to acknowledge our part in when things don't go well and relationships don't go well.
Another great reminder. Thank you so much, Cindy, for joining us for another Theology Body Thursday. Appreciate it.
Thank you.